Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Kris Lance. Kris is Vice President and General Manager at Una, a group purchasing organization that provides the Sourcing Hero with its home. Kris joins me every month to tackle a current news story or topic of interest from his own point of view. So, hi, Kris. Thank you for being back for September.
No, I'm just a glutton for punishment. Here I am, Kelly. How are you?
We should also specify that you're contractually obligated to be here every month and be happy about it.
Exactly. I'm doing well. Yourself?
I am doing just fine. Awesome. And it's notable that we're here in September because what we're going to talk about is October. And given that this is a presidential election year, in case anybody missed it, there's no way anybody missed it, we are going to speculate about, and maybe we'll see how bold we feel by the end of this conversation, even predict what might be the 2024 October surprise. So do you feel ready for this? Like this is serious stuff. I think it can be fun, but this is serious stuff.
Yeah, I think it'll be good. It'll be good. It's just for me, it's like, I don't know. I'm interested to see how our conversation goes. I think there's like 10 to 15 different, in my view, like fuses lit. So it's like, what will manifest itself? Let's see how good at guessing we are. I don't know.
So, and this is interesting. I think this is going to come across as we go through the conversation, but in preparation for this, we went through and brainstormed no less than a dozen either things that could potentially go wrong or parts of the world, parts of society, areas where things are a little bit crazy. So some of these are on the more obvious end, and that's kind of where we'll start. And then as we go along progressively, maybe with each question, we'll add another piece of foil to the hat, and we'll see just how creative we can get with this.
Yeah.
But typically the place we would start is anything financially related. So right now, we're waiting to see what the Fed does around interest rates. I think the last I read was something about maybe 0.5 point. People were advocating for interest rates to be reduced by. What do you think could crop up, either in terms of interest rates or general things around banking, the stock market, jobs report? Do you see any clouds on the horizon there?
Oof, I mean, yeah, I'm looking out. There's a hurricane bearing down when we're talking about like financial aspects, but I don't know if that would be. It's possible. I mean, I personally think we've been in a recession. I think that they've swapped that word out. I think really what we're talking about is potentially a depression and what that could really look like. So I don't know that ultimately rate cuts or not, or up or down, or how much. I mean, I think, in my opinion, from my view, the Fed is in a rock and a hard place, and the outcome, there's going to be more pain before things get better. In that financial vein, though, if we're thinking what hypothetically could be a surprise in October, what I'm watching closely yet again is like, are we going to avoid government shutdowns? I think Congress is supposed to meet again, and I think as of right now, it's set to, I think everything's set to expire October 1st, I think. So for me, it's like, well, what would those, maybe not immediately or directly, but what would that ripple effect be into October or later October, November, if there was a full government shutdown? So I also think, let me preface this, I am not a financial analyst. Go do your own research. I'm not, but when I look at the stock market, I think there's probably really only like 7 companies propping everything up. And I think also a lot of that's being pushed by this massive AI bubble. Not to say that AI won't be part of the future in a big way, but I think that there's a lot of things out there that have an AI sticker slapped on it, and it's not necessarily true, real AI. So from the financial view, that's what I think. Yeah, it's not great. And I do think it's going to get a lot worse, even if rates are cut. I think we'll see temporary relief. And I think arguably in some sectors, I think we'll get small bouts of like hyperinflation. So that's my opinion.
Now, as you were saying that, it's actually funny she talks about the stock market.
Mhm.
I was thinking about the fact, so we know that Boeing's had a hard year, right?
Oof.
Let's just
Yeah.
acknowledge, right? So first the door pops out of the Alaska Airways flight. Not great,
Mm,
especially in a world of cell phones and everybody's recording it.
right.
Then, of course, it's the Boeing Starliner that strands the two astronauts up in
Mm,
space.
mhm.
Not great PR. I
Yeah.
mean, we will give them credit. They did successfully bring the Starliner back down, but nobody felt confident enough about that to actually put people in it.
Mm,
They're going to stay up there and hitch a ride with Elon Musk's equipment, I think, in February.
yeah.
But then late last week, their union workers out in the Pacific Northwest voted to go on strike.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, now this week, we're seeing the cascading fallout from that.
Mhm.
Now, part of why I bring that up is not to suggest that, Boeing is, an indication of where the things are going.
Right.
But as all of this news started to break, I didn't hear anybody say, oh, could this potentially be an early October surprise? So,
Mm,
part of what we have to be on the lookout for are really challenging things that happen that nobody speculates could potentially be a fall or October surprise that gives us a sense of just the scale of surprise
mhm,
people are looking for this time around. I
mhm.
mean, anytime you've had assassination attempts, right? That
Yeah.
ratchets things up in terms of what can be considered a surprise. But it'll be interesting to see what major news stories, business, financial, or geopolitical,
Mhm.
get passed over as not being enough to be considered in October surprise. Because I think in other years, this staggering fall on of a major historic American company could be something where there was an expectation for the labor secretary, or in this case, the acting labor secretary, to get involved and do something. And what does that mean for the candidates and how do they respond?
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see what misses the boat on that characterization.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point, right? Because nothing's in a vacuum. I forget where or what like the specifics on what I was reading, but they were talking about Boeing going on strike, and it was a really cool image. But what they did was they broke apart like a Boeing plane, and they actually cited like where all the materials are sourced from, and like
Yes.
all the different countries that are going to be impacted, all the different industries are going to be impacted. Like it's not just Boeing that's going to have a pretty significant financial impact. Like if we're talking about a global one. So to your point, it's like, how big is big enough in a year where, or a time when everything is so big and hot and polarizing? Like in a normal environment, this would have arguably been it. So
Yes.
yeah, really great point there.
So there's things like that,
Mhm.
financially speaking, but there's also the entire world. And this to me category of potential October surprises sort of has a two-way thing. On the one hand, something could happen in the rest of the world that affects the United States or that people are expected to take a position around. So let's say there's a major change of leadership in Europe, or even one of the international organizations. There could be some substantial change in leadership. The other thing we know is that thanks to our wonderful freedom of the press, which we absolutely would not want to give up for anything,
Mhm.
but it does mean China, Russia,
Mhm.
Iran, they are all watching
Mhm.
what's going on here with rapt interest. So when we put our presidential election in the context of all of these things going on in the rest of the world, do you think geopolitically it could be something happened completely separate from the United States, right? Where it's happening out there in the world and somebody takes a position, or do you think we're more likely to see, I don't know, Putin come out and make a statement, or that we get a statement out of China or Iran or North Korea does some sort of positioning? How do you think the rest of the world could play into this from a surprise standpoint?
Well, so I think a lot of countries, they're being pretty strategic. Like it's pretty astonishing what's going on. There's not been a lot of responses. I'll just say it that way.
Mhm.
There's been some tit for tat, but like a lot, like for example, I think everybody's been waiting. It's almost like 3.5 weeks now. Like Iran said they were going to respond, and then they didn't. But wait, they will. And so I think they're being strategic. And it reminded me of this quote. I forget where it is, but I think it's from The Art of War. But it's never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And so I think a lot of them are like, U.S. isn't in great shape right now. I'll say it this way: we're not the strongest we've been, and so I think that there's a lot of countries biding their time, and I think that they're watching. From my perspective, I kind of feel like we're already in World War III. Like I feel kind of like sides have kind of already been drawn, and everybody's kind of posturing with those sides. And so if I was pressed really hard, like you have to pick what October surprise is, you're actually knocking on the topic. I think if I had to pick something like that, something going kinetic. There's been a lot of
Mm.
strongly worded letters or awkward visits that get blown out of proportion, but we've not really seen anything start to go hot up until I think it was either over the weekend, very recently, and it was surprising to me how quiet it was in the news. But the Houthis, they sank something or they hit something, which is wild, but they were using hypersonics. So I'm like,
Yes.
well, where did they get those? And then, well, what else are they going to start firing at? And so also, there are big names we're talking about. We're talking about, Israel, Hamas, Russia, China. If I had to pick one of those on what goes hot first, I actually think, and this is just my opinion, I think it probably will be or with Russia. And I say that though, mainly because of I think it was within the last week, Vladimir Putin came out and he like reminded everybody of his red line, which was if Ukraine uses long range missiles to hit Russia proper, that is a declaration of war by NATO and the US. And
Mm.
on its face, it's like, oh, come on, man, you're just posturing. But I don't think a lot of people, unless you have a military mind, you wouldn't know this. But I don't think people realize he's correct, because for those long range missiles, anybody can fire them, but for them to hit, our troops and our satellites have to be used. Like it's literally impossible for them to hit their target without us being involved. And so since he's made that stance, what I've been watching is numerous NATO countries come out and still support Ukraine using them. And so what I'm watching to see is if the US gives that green light, because to me, it sounds like we're getting ready to call bluffs. And I think that is where things could start going hot and very quickly turn into like the October surprise of all surprises. So,
And it's so interesting that you say this. I'm going to take a moment to brag.
okay.
Cover your ears, everybody, if you can't handle this. I knew Kris was going to say this. And I was so excited this morning when I opened my print edition of the Wall Street Journal, and right at the top of the opinion page, the article reads, U.S. shrugs as World War III approaches. A devastating report on global threats and American weaknesses is met with indifference. That's by Walter Russell Mead. And I thought to myself in that moment, I need to have this in front of me when I talk to Kris later, because I know this is going to come up. I think you're absolutely right. And the thing that concerns me the most about this is because we as the United States look at what's the most disruptive thing. And you and I have talked about a lot of these things over time: food certainty, cash flow, currency, stock market, all of these things. All of those would be dwarfed in comparison to what a World War III would look like. Now, we're certainly not hoping for that, but
Right.
even, I don't know, what would we call it? A little mini precursor to a global conflict would be something that absolutely nobody wants to face.
Right. Right. And I would say, of all the things we've, thought about or hypothesized, I'm like, please let me be wrong on this. Like, please let me be wrong on that. Like,
I'll let you be wrong, Kris.
I would
We'll
gladly be
rule
wrong
that
on
way. You can be wrong.
So, but yeah, no, I agree. I think the writing's on the wall because I think,
Mhm.
I mean, Putin always looks serious when you see him talking, but
Oh, yes.
I listened to, well, albeit the translator, but I listened I watched his mouth and his mannerisms, and it's like, they're not playing around. So
No.
while some of our leaders may want to shrug it off as well, call their bluff, it's like, my goodness, like we're talking about millions and millions of civilians about calling bluffs here. So I hope cooler heads can prevail. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope nobody wants to call bluffs on this. But we will certainly see. So
Now, partially because we don't want to leave everybody depressed or
right,
worried,
right.
and partially because this category of events could be just as much an October surprise or spoiler as anything else.
Mhm.
Let's finish with sort of a third category of potential surprises. I'm thinking of something like a very broad human interest category. Now, this could be something like disease, right? If you think about in the past, the attention that's been drawn by Ebola outbreaks, right? That would
Mm,
be,
mhm.
we have talked a lot about food supply chains. There's always the possibility of a high visibility famine or a persecution or a group of people that could seize news headlines and kind of suck all the oxygen out of the room.
Mhm.
But there's also things like sports. There could be a major sporting event or a major figure that comes out and make a surprising announcement, or a team that takes the world by storm.
Mm,
Or there could even be a story that happens someplace in the world that just grabs our attention. And for an example of that, I actually think about that soccer team, the group of little boys
mm,
that got stuck in that cave in Thailand. Do you
mhm.
remember? And they had to send in the special ops
Yes.
team, and there was
Yeah.
some loss of life there, which is devastating. But to
Mhm.
get them and their coach out of the cave, and I felt like when that was going on, that consumed my attention. Every day you get up and you check, like, what's the latest
Right.
on the boys in the cave? That sort of thing, while not necessarily having anything to do with finance, economy, geopolitics, even the US directly, could still be a big enough news story to kind of throw things off kilter and create unexpected situations.
Mhm.
Any thoughts from your perspective, Kris, on sort of the US or global human story element that could surprise us all and divert attention?
Yeah, so I think there's one's kind of funny. The other one, you actually were jogging my thoughts on it, but I think it would be a massive surprise, and I'm having fun with this. But imagine the uproar if Taylor Swift came out and endorsed Trump like that. I mean, it would break the internet. So
Okay, the
that would
internet.
be an October surprise. But it could be, in maybe a more serious or probable tone. I would say, what about the people stuck in space? Like, does that fall
Yes.
down? I think Elon had success with their launch. I think got everything back down, but you know, does something happen there? I don't know. Is there something on the EV front that's been a little bit quieter as a lot of companies have been backing off of it? So you're right. I think it doesn't necessarily have to be all of these big things we've been following. And in fact, like if we look to history, because like looking to history is kind of like your best, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so
Yes.
if you want to take a guess at the future, you can look at the past. And I remember back in the 70s, like I think the surprise was George W. with a DUI arrest, or
Mhm.
the 80s, right? I think Iran was holding hostages, and then they said, we're not going to let them go till after an election. So it doesn't necessarily have to always be something that's been ongoing. It could be brand new, fresh, and that is captivating enough to divert attention and still have significant impacts. So I don't know. You bring up a good point though, as far as when you're watching the hand move over here, what's going on the left side. So it's probably worth looking at all news articles and just having an idea of what's going on just across the board.
They
So
could find Jimmy Hoffa
yeah, who knows, right?
or Atlantis
Exactly. Or
or
maybe
Amelia Earhart.
they finally release who killed JFK. Like it could be with all the assassination attempts, like maybe that's another diversion. Attention grabber, I'll say. So I'm not too sure. It could be in this day and age, Kelly. It could be anything. So
then to that point,
mhm.
in this day and age, as we start to wrap this down, it's interesting how different people deal with surprises. And that could be, I'll be totally honest, that could be something as simply surprising as a loud noise. Like if you as a person think about how do you handle loud noises, or how do you think about a sudden illness or injury that throws your schedule off, or how do you handle it when, I don't know, flight is delayed and it totally throws off your schedule and your plans. Some people very much roll with it.
Mhm.
Some people instantly like, that's done. It's a shutdown. I know for me, that's when everything comes into focus.
Mm.
I've had a few cases over time. In most cases, it was a kid that got hurt, right? Something happens. For me,
Mhm.
I believe that's actually when I'm at my best, because all I can see is mission critical.
Yeah.
All I experience in that moment is mission critical. But it's also understandable that people are shaken by these things. So, two-part question, Kris.
Okay.
First one is, how do you do with surprises of any kind?
Mhm.
And the second part of the question is, any techniques or advice? I know I've shared here before. My advice is typically to think slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's sort of mentally
Yes.
where I go. But any advice, or you're great with quotes. I love that one you just shared about doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So how do you deal with surprises? And any advice for settling oneself when jarring news, good or bad, has come across? How do we not let it throw us off kilter?
This is a good one. So personally, I'll own it. I am I am not the biggest fan of surprises or change. I don't think most people are. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I love change. I don't think that's true. I think people love
I think
change.
no one ever.
No, ever. I think people only like change when it's on their terms. And is that really change, or is that like a plan you're
Yeah.
enacting, right? So I'm a human, not really a fan of surprises or things happening to me, but what I will tell you is that's life. Like, and I think most of the successful people, what they've done is they've learned to be adaptable in any situation, or not the biggest fan of this quote, but it's true, but learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm.
So what I do for myself daily, usually it takes form in the gym, but I do try mental exercises as well. And I do it with both of my kids, as I intentionally introduce adversity to myself. And the reason I do that is to really build mental strength, because then when something serious happens and it's not on your terms, you're able to adapt. Now, not liking it doesn't mean I'm not very well equipped to deal with it. When something happens, I'm kind of like, who cares? Like, fix it, solve it, go forward, right? Charge ahead, always on the offensive. But ultimately, I think the reason I'm able to do that is because a lot of times, and again, it's at the gym, right? Mile 4, I told myself I was going to go 5. Nope, you're actually going to go 6 now. And what I do in those moments is I'm trying to put myself in the mud before I get there.
Yeah.
So that way, when things are going sideways, when things aren't going well, it's kind of like, you've been here before. This too shall pass. Kind of like other conversations we've had, Kelly. So I think the only way you could do it is to essentially train yourself to think that way, to not throw your hands up when something happens, but to try and figure it out. Like what I even tell my daughter, right, is, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to cry. Just realize the problem's still going to be there when you're done crying.
That's right.
So you're still going to have to figure it out, charge ahead, and I'm here to support you, right? But that's the mindset that I think that will serve people well in preparation for a bunch of unknowns, and then even more oftentimes the ripple effects of those unknowns. So
Yeah, one of the ways I've actually heard that described, that same sort of idea, is around building capacity.
yeah.
Something very stressful comes, something very difficult comes, and you do hopefully get through it. If you're listening to this podcast, you got through it. Congratulations. But you've now built capacity. You know that even if something different happens at the future, but it's at the same stress or intensity or difficulty level, you have built the capacity to step up and handle that for a
Yep.
defined period of time.
Yep.
And so I feel like, as always, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. Not that we're wishing for it. We're all hoping for you to be wrong, right,
Right.
Kris, with the geopolitical conflict.
Yep.
At the same time, we're going to watch the skies
Yep.
and we're going to watch the headlines and we're going to watch what other people are doing around the world. Because so you and I are talking here, it's the 17th. This will air on September 25th. Happy September 25th, everybody.
Hey.
There are 5 more days left in September, which then creates 31 days during which that surprise could happen.
There we go.
Kris, if people have met you for the first time by listening to this conversation, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you or to learn more about Una?
So the best way to get in touch with me, you can send me an email. It's Kris, Kris, @una.com. I don't have any social media except for LinkedIn. So if you're looking for me, that's the only place you'll find me. Again, it's Kris with a K, Kris, Lance. And then outside of that, obviously, you can always go to our website. It's una.com. And if you go to About Us, you can see all the awesome people at Una and can mash my face. And I think you can get in touch with me that way too. So my parting words for everybody is don't pray for an easier life. Pray to be stronger so that you can actually, handle these things. Life's always going to have challenges, and 90% of it's how you respond. So,
and we'll see you in October.
Then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.